Fuck!
The PlayStation Vita is one of the greatest failures ever created by Sony. Sure, there have been worse failures by Sony, such as not securing a digital license for Final Fantasy Crisis Core on PSP, the Emoji Movie, and the PS5 price increase. But those failures are ugly.
But this one was beautiful.
In 2004, Sony broke into the handheld gaming market with the release of the PlayStation Portable, and everything was well in the world. The PSP released as part of the 7th generation of consoles and competed with the Nintendo DS in the handheld market. The Nintendo DS outsold the PSP by more than 5 units, yet the PSP gained a lot of popularity and was seen as a success, selling more than 80 million units in its lifetime. Rumors of a successor to the PSP came as early as 2009 because certain people could not keep their mouths shut. Sorry about that. It wouldn't be until centuries later that we would finally learn about a new device called the NGP. Rumors of the device's capabilities went wild, until finally in June of the year 2011 at E3, Sony announced the final name of the PSP's successor.
What you've come to know as NGP, our next generation portable, is officially named PlayStation Vita.
Do you know that Vita means life in Latin? Wow, such culture!
After a few delays, the PlayStation Vita finally released in Japan in December 2011 and in North America and Europe in February 2012, leaving me with a stain in my pants that I couldn't explain.
It's just yogurt.
The PlayStation Vita launched with 26 titles in Japan and 25 titles in the West, with Sony announcing that more than 100 titles have been in development since before the launch of the system. The PlayStation Vita released with a bang, but sales quickly dwindled down, and the console ultimately underperformed in the market, ending its lifetime with an estimated number of less than 20 million units being sold.
So what went wrong?
It is difficult to pinpoint just one reason as to why the PlayStation Vita failed, and instead, its failure needs to be attributed to a combination of reasons. But don't give up on the Vita just yet. This device that easily fits in your pocket is like an onion, and onions have layers, just like ogres.
Okay, things might get a bit messy. So in order to convince you why you need a PlayStation Vita after it has already been discontinued, I'm going to make use of a trusty friend of a show that you all love and know. Mr. Board. Mr. Board is going to help us with a sort of pros and cons list, so that you can also see why the PlayStation Vita is still awesome today.
Looking back, the PlayStation Vita feels like a device that was ahead of its time, yet it missed so many marks. The device took handheld gaming to another level with graphics that were unmatched in the handheld market, but even that was not enough to save the device.
First problem, lack of important features.
The original PS Vita released with an OLED screen that taught me the true meaning of black. Even when games were not graphically impressive, the OLED screen helped the colors stand out and make it pop more. They unfortunately swapped the screen with an LCD screen for the second model, which helps improve battery life but brings down the overall experience. The Vita also brought many other upgrades that we wanted for the PSP, such as a second analog stick.
Who needs a console with a second analog stick when you can just use shitty controls instead?
A second analog stick allowed 3D games to control better on handheld, and finally opened up the doors to so many more possibilities in handheld gaming. The button sizes on the Vita can feel a bit on the smaller side, and the analogs are positioned slightly too close to the screen, sometimes causing unwanted screen presses while playing. It would have been nice for some of the controls to be more spaced out, but even with these button size problems, the overall feel of the device is still slick. What I personally wanted most was a portable device that has the controls of a PS3 controller, allowing developers to create games that control and feel more like home console level games. Instead, they gave us no trigger buttons or clickable thumbsticks, removing a lot of the inputs we got used to in gaming. Another missing feature was the ability to output the Vita to a television or screen. With a PSP, you were able to connect to your television using the correct component cables, allowing you to continue your games on a bigger screen when you got home. With the Vita, Sony completely skipped this feature. They later released a PS TV that is basically a PS Vita in a box that can connect to a TV and not play a lot of the PS Vita games.
Why?
Needless to say, the PlayStation TV was also a huge flop, due to Sony not clearly explaining it to consumers in their marketing, but more on that another day.
Unnecessary features.
The problem with the Vita was that instead of giving us the features that we wanted, they decided to give us the features we never knew we didn't want. Instead of giving the Vita the trigger buttons and clickable thumbsticks that we wanted, they gave us some shitty front and rear cameras, a touchscreen, and a rear touchpad.
The fuck am I supposed to do with this?
There are very few games on the Vita that actually benefit from having the shitty camera and a back touchpad. While you do have some good games, such as Invisimals and Tearaway, that utilize these features in fun ways, most games could have better benefited from having a standard input options instead. With a camera so shitty, it sometimes feels like why did they even try? Removing these unnecessary features could have brought down the device's launch price and make it appeal to more people as a viable option for a gaming device. It would have also given Sony the opportunity to later sell an extra camera accessory like they did with the PSP, making them more of the thing they love the most.
Money!
Some features that were included were nice, such as the music player and video player, but it sometimes felt like they pushed the Vita's media capabilities too much, while not offering an affordable solution to enjoy the media. I filled up my PS Vita's memory card pretty quickly with games, and the thought of having to carry a movie or music on the device while I had a smartphone in my pocket just didn't make any sense. If they focused more on the games instead of the shitty cameras, then people might have seen more of a purpose for the Vita than it being a smartphone that can't call. The Vita included the options to view terrible pictures you took, the ability to send and receive emails, browse Twitter and Facebook, browse the web, use a map, and it even had the ability to see if anyone nearby made the same poor choice in handheld system as you. Apart from the near feature, I never used any of the other features, because why would I want to read work emails, or go on Twitter to find out that Jeff discovered that cream soda is just vanilla flavor, or use maps on my gaming system? I'm not saying these features are all bad, but when your device seems more like a media device than a gaming console, there isn't much reason to actually use it.
What were you trying to be?
At least they included features like Party Chat, which Nintendo has yet to figure out on the Switch, as well as Welcome Park, which was a nice way for you to discover which features about 2 of the games will utilize in meaningful ways.
Pricing.
All of the unnecessary features included in the Vita led to another problem. The Vita was overpriced. Released at a price point of $249 to $299, it was the same price, if not more expensive than a PS3 or Xbox 360 at the time, and they could at least play Borderlands 2 properly. Not long after the reveal of the Vita's price, Nintendo also decided to cut the price of the 3DS, making the Vita seem like the more expensive and less obvious entry point for handheld gaming. This overpriced point also bled into the next point, which was
storage.
The PSP had no onboard storage and required you to have a special Sony memory card to save your games. Then, we got the PSP Go that solved the problem a bit by including 16GB of onboard storage. The PSP Go's memory could further be upgraded with another memory card, but you could essentially use it right out of the box to play your games. Then Sony released the PS Vita, and they decided to be like,
Ha ha ha! Onboard storage? What even is that?
the PlayStation Vita released with no onboard storage. Instead, Sony decided that it was best to make even less people want to buy the console by forcing them to use a proprietary memory card. After already spending $249 to $299 on a console, you then realize that you need to buy a memory card to save your games or download some of your old PSP games, and they don't come cheap. Instead of going with the standard SD format, Sony made their own memory cards that only work on the Vita.
Why would Sony do this? Maybe they hate consumers, or maybe they suffer from inflated testicle disease.
At launch, the price of his memory cards ranged from $30 for a shitty 4GB memory card, all the way up to $120 for a 32GB memory card. The cards later received price cuts, and they released an even bigger 64GB version of his memory cards that cost over $100 at the time of its release, and still didn't feel like it had enough memory. If you were anything like me, you went with the more expensive 3G version and had to have the biggest memory card possible, so getting a Vita along with the card at launch cost me about $420. The second version of the PS Vita that released later came with 1GB of onboard storage.
At that point, just don't.
This at least helped you to save some of your games, but was by no means enough to download the first party title, leading you to have to buy the overpriced memory cards in order to enjoy digital-only titles, PSP and PlayStation 1 titles.
Lack of games.
The PlayStation Vita launched with one of the biggest launch libraries of any console up to the point, and had a lot of banging titles at release, such as Uncharted Golden Abyss, Wipeout 2048, Hot Shots Golf, Mod Nation Racers, Rayman Origins, Tales from Space, Mutant Blobs Attack, and Michael Jackson The Experience. Sony even promised that hundreds of more games are already in development, making the future of the Vita seem bright. It had backwards compatibility with your PSP digital library, as well as PlayStation 1 games, but that however took a while to work. There were tons of new and old games to play. The time after the release of the PlayStation Vita was however very bare in terms of game releases. There was a game released here and there, but it was not enough to help push the sales of the console. Sure, there were already a lot of titles to enjoy, but the lack of new games being released gave the Vita a reputation as a console with no games. Maybe if they launched with 10 good titles and spread out the other launch titles a bit more, like releasing 1 or 2 new games every week following the launch of the Vita, it might have felt like there was a lot more to look forward to. But instead, the future of the game releases on the Vita felt very bleak.
Expensive games.
Big game releases on the Vita were priced around $50, while Nintendo 3DS games were priced around $10 cheaper. With better hardware and visuals, the price of developing games for the platform was more expensive than developing games for other consoles, such as the 3DS and smartphones, which could also pass with a less visually polished game, as it was not what was expected from those platforms. More expensive game prices deterred people from getting into the Vita or purchasing more games for the device. These higher game prices were required, as development costs for games on the device were significantly higher. Less people buying the console and games due to the high prices led to less developers releasing their games for the Vita. Developers instead focused on releasing the games on 3DS and home consoles, which then in turn inflated the problem of people saying that the Vita had no games.
Lack of support from Sony.
The next catalyst in the mix is the fact that Sony did not support the PlayStation Vita enough themselves.
And that's a fact.
Sony released some awesome titles on the Vita, but they released too little too infrequently. Instead, Sony rather focused on developing and releasing games on the PS3 and PS4, as those platforms were actually selling. This gave the Vita a reputation of not having enough first-party games, which in turn gave people the idea that not even Sony wants to develop games for their own platform. At the end of 2012, Sony even stopped releasing sales figures for the PlayStation Vita, ultimately showing that they were embarrassed by the sales figures. One of the saddest days in the history of the Vita was when Sony announced they would no longer be releasing games on the Vita and instead would be relying on third-party developers to support the system in terms of game releases. This made a lot of consumers and developers lose their faith in the Vita and really hurt its reputation even further, branding it as Sony's abandoned platform. In contrast, the Nintendo 3DS also struggled at first, but Nintendo kept supporting the platform by releasing new good games even when the console wasn't so hot.
And the 3DS had a price drop.
And look where it got the 3DS. A publisher abandoning their platform creates the question as to why we should support the platform when the publisher doesn't even believe in it themselves. The Vita ended up having tons of amazing games released on the platform, but it had a reputation that it didn't. And why would we buy a console with a reputation of having no games?
The Vita's features were overpromised.
The original messaging surrounding the Vita was that it was a device that could stand against a home console and offered PS3-like games on the go. Although the games we got were amazing for a handheld device at the time, what we thought we were getting and what we got were not completely the same thing. This is mostly due to Sony, the media, and my friends overhyping the Vita and creating an image that couldn't be met. The Vita did offer a lot of games that were also released on the PlayStation 3, and most of them were stunning, such as Mortal Kombat. It gave you the full console experience on the go and cemented the Vita as a device that could. But what we didn't get was big open world games like Oblivion and Fallout, or even a good Call of Duty. In the end, the PlayStation Vita library started competing with the libraries of other Sony consoles, and the results were not great.
Out of place.
Since the release of the PlayStation Vita, the human race has evolved. But back then, the type of games they released on a portable device did not entirely make sense for a portable device. Portable games were supposed to offer quick play sessions to enjoy during your travels, or for when you have a minute or two free. This is the same reason moms love Candy Crush. They can play a level or two while the kids play with the power tools, and then put it down to attend to the injuries that follow. Instead, most of the games that released on the PlayStation Vita were big experiences that required you to invest in your playtime. For some people that travels a lot, it makes sense, but for the average gamer, why would you sit at home and play Uncharted Golden Abyss when you can play all the other Uncharted games on your home console instead?
Smartphones.
There's no denying that one of the biggest hurdles in the way of the PlayStation Vita's success was the rise of smartphones. Smartphones were becoming more common, and the games released on them were greater in numbers and quality than ever before on phones. It would not be until much later that we would realize.
Wait, this is bullshit.
At the time, we all had flashy phone goggles on and either had or wanted new flashy phones. We thought that it was the best thing that ever happened to humanity. It was an all-in-one device that we could carry everywhere with us. People would not think that we are weird because it's just a phone and everyone has one of those. The best part was that now there was even more space in your pocket to carry around stuff like puppies and the marijuanas.
Do you see where I'm going with this?
People did not see the need to give up the space they now use to carry their cabinet cigarettes and pets around, just to do the same thing the device in their other pocket can do. Sure, mobile games were but a lot of them were also free. Comparing playing a game for free on a device you already have, to buying a PlayStation Vita and a memory card and a game, then a lot of people will rather go with the free option. The Vita should have focused on the gaming experience as opposed to being a smartphone-like device that couldn't call. Maybe if they included the phone option in the device, it would have pushed more units, but no one wants their intense gaming moments to be interrupted by a call, so leaving out that feature might have been for the best. The rise of smartphones did not only affect the sales of the PlayStation Vita, but the sales of Nintendo's 3DS were also significantly less than previous generations of handheld consoles.
PlayStation 4.
When Sony announced the release of the PlayStation 4, it felt like they dropped the Vita like a hot potato. All of the marketing shifted to the new hot item, and the Vita started falling even more behind. With the shift in marketing, Sony only cemented the idea that the time of the Vita is over.
Wow, this really isn't looking in favor of the PlayStation Vita. Luckily, there's a solution for most of these problems. Hacking, modding, and homebrew.
The saving grace and the reason you should buy a Vita is the homebrew and modding market. Hackers, modders, and developers have managed to push the limits of the Vita, unlocking features it never meant to have. Gone is the need for pricey memory cards, as you can now just use a SD to Vita card that allows you to use a standard micro SD card with your Vita. There are also mods that can turn the SIM card slot on the 3G version into a micro SD card slot. Through homebrew and modding, you can also activate the ability for your Vita to output its display to a PC using a proprietary charging cable, allowing you to enjoy your games on a bigger screen. It is sad that this feature had to be unlocked by hacking your Vita, instead of it being standard. It could have unlocked the ability for a dock to be released, giving the Vita a head start on the hybrid console market before the release of the Switch. Even though Sony missed the opportunity, it is nice to know that hackers have our back and have achieved this in some way. Through modding, you can also allow Bluetooth controller support on your system that allows you to play certain games using a PS3 or PS4 controller, which makes playing games on bigger screens feel much nicer. Hacking your Vita also gives you the option of overclocking your system. While this makes your system heat up faster, it does give you a smoother experience in certain games like Borderlands 2. This does not fix Borderlands 2, but it makes the experience in some bigger games a little more bearable.
And then comes piracy. A bug flew into my mouth.
There is an application called Adrenaline that you can put on your hacked Vita that switches your Vita over to a PSP operating system and allows you to play all your backed up PSP games that you can't buy digitally, like Final Fantasy Crisis Core, Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep, and the fan-translated version of Final Fantasy Type 0. There are a lot of emulators that can run smoothly on the Vita, allowing you to enjoy your NES, SNES, Game Boy, and Game Boy Advance libraries amongst others. There are other emulators that further support systems like Nintendo 64 and Nintendo DS, but there is still a bit to be desired with those emulators before they are perfect. The homebrew market is bringing us better and easier options for emulations, so do a bit of research and you might just find the system you are looking for, young Padawan. The homebrew community has even gone on to create ports of games that were never officially released on the PlayStation Vita, and give you the opportunity to experience even more.
Wow! The Vita can run Doom! The old Doom.
There are loads of options and improvements Sony missed out on giving us that hackers and modders ended up providing in the end, which is why the system is better today than ever before.
Good games.
Even with a reputation of not having any games, there are still loads of awesome titles on the PS Vita that are worth the playtime. Games and series such as Persona 4 Golden, Gravity Rush, Killzone Mercenaries, Dragon Quest Builders, Ys, Little Big Planet, Sly Cooper, Ratchet & Clank, Need for Speed Most Wanted, Digimon Cyber Sleuth, Attack on Titan, Freedom Wars, and many more give us tons of reasons to pick up a Vita and have fun. After all these years, the PlayStation Vita still feels sleek, and it still feels like a handout that could hold up in the market today.
Indie games.
Since the AA and AAA market abandoned the PlayStation Vita, the indie market has swooped in and made the PlayStation Vita their home. Hordes of small developers brought tons of amazing games that were cheaper than the first-party games. They gave us awesome titles from Stardew Valley to even Terraria, and gave us so many more reasons to love our PlayStation Vitas. Even though Sony was no longer supporting a Vita themselves, they shifted their focus to supporting a lot of indie studios, and provided them with the resources to develop games for the Vita. This opportunity gave a lot of indie developers the space they needed to break into the gaming market, and start making a name for themselves.
Remote play.
The Vita offered some remote play support on the PlayStation 3, although it was very restrictive, in the sense that you couldn't play PlayStation 3 titles this way. The PlayStation 4 brought so much extra to the table and really pushed the remote play to where it should have been. You are able to connect remotely to your PlayStation 4 and play your games using your PlayStation Vita. This made the Vita a great companion device to the PlayStation 4, allowing you to play your games when you can't be with your console, as long as you have a stable internet connection. It is not perfect, but it is something.
As you can see, the PlayStation Vita is a device that's still worth picking up even today. It is sad that the device never made it as far as it should have, and could have. It might not be getting any new games, but in the end what we're left with is pretty cool. Oh cool, the PlayStation Vita is finally charged, and it's time to get into some games. Wait, what's going on? No. PlayStation Mobile? No! No! Damn it, that only works in dreams.